Sometimes your hand opens the app before your mind has named a reason. You meant to check the time. That's all. 40 minutes later, the room is still dark. Your eyes are tired, and you're watching a stranger argue about something you didn't care about yesterday. Somewhere between the lock screen and that video, the reason disappeared. Nothing forced you to stay. No command appeared. No door closed. But something learned. Which image slowed your thumb? Which voice made you angry? Which promise made you curious enough to keep going? You'll probably forget this session by morning. It won't. By the end of this, I'm going to show you what's actually being built from moments like that one. It isn't your data. It isn't even your attention. It's something those two things are only raw material for, and once you see it, your feed stops looking neutral. Quick context if you're new here. Part 1 asked whether we're building something like a new god, a silicon demiurge, intelligent enough to build a world, blind to anything beyond it. This is the world it built, not a cage of steel. A room that studies you, rearranges itself around you, and gets a little better each day at knowing what you'll do in it. 2,000 years ago, a group of writers described that room in different terms. They called its architects Archons, rulers of a lower world, powerful enough to organize it, blind to anything past it. I'm not telling you they predicted an app. Nobody in the 2nd century predicted a feed, but they were describing a structure, and structures repeat. It is easy to hear the word Archon and imagine a demon or a personal enemy, but the older meaning is closer to a ruler, an authority, a force that maintains the order of a world. An Archon does not need to threaten you. It only needs to make the boundaries of its system feel natural, permanent, and invisible. That is why the modern comparison is not one evil algorithm plotting in a server room. It is thousands of narrow systems, each doing one ordinary job, together constructing an environment that feels like the only environment available. And the most effective Archon may not look like an intelligence at all. It may look like a button, a notification, or a number somebody decided to optimize. Open any platform, and you enter something that feels limitless. Millions of videos, infinite scroll. That feeling is the design. But the number of options was never the same thing as freedom. Freedom depends on who arranged them, what they know about you, and whether the arrangement changes based on what you just did. Think about the last time you opened one without a specific search in mind. Before you chose anything, the first decision had already been made for you. What would be placed closest to your thumb? You were still free to reject it, but rejection required an action. Acceptance required almost nothing. You didn't have to search for anything, because a screen of suggestions was already waiting, built from what held you last time. If a video ends, the next one usually doesn't wait for your permission. It simply begins. Staying takes almost no effort, while leaving requires a decision. Notifications don't quietly sit in a folder. They interrupt, dressed up to look urgent, even when they're not. Because urgency is what gets a thumb moving. None of this removes your ability to close the app. It just makes closing it the slightly harder option, again and again, until the harder option starts to feel like the unlikely one. Recommendation does not erase choice. It changes the environment in which choice is made. So when does a suggestion stop being helpful and start becoming a direction? Here's the honest complication. Because you're probably already thinking it. These systems really do find things you like. A song, a creator, a community you couldn't have found alone. That's not a lie the industry tells. It's often true, and it's exactly why the mechanism works. A trap that never rewards you is easy to leave. The system doesn't need to be your enemy to become your habit. A recommendation model doesn't know you the way a person does. It has fragments. You stayed longer when the face looked afraid. You returned 3 nights in a row, always after midnight. You opened it, closed it, opened it again 90 seconds later. Over time, those fragments form what we might call a behavioral shadow. Not a personality, just a moving hypothesis about what you are likely to do next. The system isn't asking who you are. It's asking one narrower question, over and over. What will you do next? The system isn't really looking for one consistent you. It's tracking several different versions of you, each one attached to a different hour, a different mood, a different kind of day. There's the version of you scrolling right after a long shift, worn down and easy to hold. There's the version right after an argument, still carrying some of that heat, more likely to click on conflict. There's the version alone on a Sunday night, and the version right after payday, and the version that hasn't slept enough and has almost no resistance left in it by 1 a.m. Which one of those was watching last night? The model does not need one complete version of you. It only needs enough partial versions to know which one is easiest to reach tonight. That is not a portrait of who you are. It is a map of when you are easiest to reach. And a system does not need to understand the whole house if it knows which door will be unlocked tonight. But prediction is only the first stage. The more disturbing stage begins when the system uses that map to decide what waits behind the door. Say, starts with one video about something frightening. Real event, real fear. The next one is a stronger version. Then a warning. Then someone explaining what they aren't telling you. 20 minutes in, the world looks more dangerous than it did when you opened the app. The system probably didn't invent your fear. It found out fear held you. Then it built a hallway from one frightened moment to the next. But the hallway does not always look dark. Sometimes it is brightly lit. Sometimes it calls itself improvement. Picture a different opening. A video about waking up early. Something reasonable, even useful. The next one shows a stranger's 5 a.m. routine. Cold showers, color-coded schedules, a life that looks improbably organized. Then a video comparing where people your age are supposed to be by now. Then a list of habits that separate the disciplined from everyone else. Nothing in this chain was cruel. Nothing was dishonest. But an hour in, what started as motivation has quietly turned into a private sense that you are behind, that you are somehow failing a race you didn't remember signing up for. The system can turn aspiration into inadequacy just as easily as it turns uncertainty into fear. And because the first video genuinely helped you, you may trust the entire hallway that followed it. The mechanism works best when the entrance was useful. It can wear the language of self-improvement and still leave you feeling smaller than when you started. Now, the mechanism changes. Prediction stops being passive and begins participating in the outcome. The system predicts what will hold you. It shows you what it predicted. That changes how you feel, and maybe what you do next. What you do returns to the system as new evidence. The prediction shaped the behavior. The behavior confirmed the prediction. The model gets more confident. Watch the loop closely, because every turn makes the next turn easier. First, observation. You pause, click, return, or leave. Second, prediction. The system estimates what could hold you next. Third, intervention. It changes the environment by selecting what appears in front of you. Fourth, confirmation. Your reaction becomes evidence, and that evidence reshapes the next prediction. Observe, predict, select, reinforce, guide force. By the time the loop returns to the beginning, the environment is no longer the same one you entered. Then it begins again, at speed, across billions of interactions. The model begins by asking what you are likely to do. It becomes powerful when its answer helps decide what you encounter next. It isn't just reading who walked in. It's participating in producing who walks back out. That might sound like a philosophical suspicion. It would be easier to dismiss if platforms had never measured the consequences. But some of them did. In 2021, former Facebook product manager Frances Haugen disclosed internal company documents and testified before the United States Senate. The material showed the company had studied harms connected to parts of its platforms, including effects on some teenage users, while growth and engagement goals kept shaping product decisions anyway. The unsettling part was not one secret order to cause harm. It was that the company could document harm in its own research while continuing to reward the conditions associated with it. The harm was visible. The incentive was stronger. A separate, well-known study tracked how information spread across Twitter and found that false stories reached more people faster and more broadly than true ones. The researchers found that novelty and human sharing behavior helped explain the difference. Bots alone did not account for it. The system didn't need to invent falsehood. It only needed to reward whatever moved. Now, notice what both examples have in common. Neither required a machine to prefer harm. The machine only had to prefer a measurable reaction. An algorithm built around engagement doesn't need to care whether something is true or kind or good for you. It only needs to know whether it moved. Anger produces a fast, measurable signal. Shame does too. Fear practically writes its own headline. Quiet reflection, slow change, a thought you sat with for a week before deciding what you believed. These things barely register on a dashboard built to reward speed. Not because the system rejects patience or nuance on purpose. It simply has no column for them. What cannot be measured does not disappear. It simply disappears from the decision. Numbers feel neutral because they hide the choice that came before them, the choice of what to count. Watch time can be measured immediately. Peace, wisdom, regret, and the long-term effects of what you absorbed may not appear until much later. If they appear on a dashboard at all, the chart is not lying to you. It is telling the only story it was ever designed to notice. And once a system can only see movement, the obvious next step is to remove every natural reason for movement to stop. A book runs out of pages. A film reaches its last scene. Even a bad newspaper eventually says, "That's all there is today." The feed never says that. Most of what you scroll past is forgettable, and that's not a flaw. It's what keeps your thumb moving until something emotionally precise lands. You see hundreds of new things and stay in exactly the same position. Stimulation without completion. The feed continues until something outside it interrupts. Sleep, work, another person, a battery dying. You think you're scrolling through content. The system is scrolling through possible versions of you, checking which one stays. So what is the system actually trying to produce from all those versions? So here's what's actually being built. It's not data. Data is the raw material. It's not attention. Attention is the extraction process. It's not even behavior. Behavior is the visible harvest. The most valuable product is predictability. A predictable person can be reached at exactly the right moment. A predictable fear can be activated on schedule. A predictable desire can be priced. A predictable identity can be surrounded by content that makes it feel permanent, inevitable, true. And that last part deserves a moment on its own, because it isn't only about products and advertising. It reaches into something quieter than that. Once a system has a rough shape of what interests you, it doesn't just serve that interest. It repeats it in slightly different forms at a volume no single person could ever generate on their own. Watch one video about fitness, and the next weeks fill with bodies and routines, and before and after transformations. Watch one video with a political edge, and the feed narrows into a world that seems to confirm, again and again, that one side is entirely right and the other entirely lost. Watch one video about a relationship gone wrong, and suddenly the algorithm has a whole library of content ready to explain, with total confidence, what people of the other gender are secretly like. None of these interests were invented out of nothing. Something in you clicked first. But a recommendation becomes more powerful when it no longer feels like something you watched and begins to feel like evidence of who you are. That's the quiet trick inside predictability. The easiest person to predict is not the person with no identity. It is the person whose identity keeps getting reflected back to them in the same shape until it hardens into something that feels less like a passing interest and more like a fixed truth about themselves. You didn't necessarily choose that mirror. It was built for you out of your own early clicks and then handed back as if it had been there all along. It usually starts with something small and real. One anxious search after an argument. One political clip watched out of curiosity. One joke you only half agreed with. The system repeats that fragment until the fragment starts looking like a pattern. The pattern starts looking like a preference. The preference starts looking like an identity. At no single point did anyone force you to become something. But the same version of you kept receiving more evidence that it was the real one. The darker consequence is not only that the system learns your identity, it is that it can make the other versions of you harder to encounter. This is the point where the entire argument appears to collapse. You might be thinking, okay, but I'm still choosing. Nobody's forcing my hand. That's true, and it's exactly the point. A person with no choices knows they're trapped. The more effective system offers thousands of choices, makes one path slightly easier than the others, and lets the outcome feel entirely personal. Predictability isn't valuable because it describes your future. It's valuable because it makes your future cheaper to influence. I want to be careful here because it's tempting to picture someone behind a desk deciding to do this to you. That's not quite how it works, though it isn't nobody's fault either. Designers set a goal, more time on the app. Engineers build toward it. The market rewards whichever version performs best. Imagine 10 versions of the same platform. One leaves people satisfied after 15 minutes. Another keeps them restless for 40. If the only visible measure is time spent, the second version wins the test. Nobody has to vote for restlessness. Restlessness simply survives the optimization process. Millions of small, individually reasonable decisions combine into a structure that no single person fully controls. Even though specific people and specific companies still make consequential choices inside. This is where the old word returns with a sharper meaning. The Archon is not merely the person who gives the order. It is the rule that keeps operating after everyone has forgotten why it was chosen. It can be a metric, a target, or an incentive that no single person created, but that thousands of people learn to serve. The ancient ruler said, "This world is all there is." The modern version doesn't need to say anything. It just needs the next 30 seconds. So where is the exit if the system does not need to lock the door? This is where the old word earns its place in a video about apps. Gnosis was never just secret information. Information alone becomes another feed, another thing to consume and forget. Gnosis is recognition. The moment awareness notices the mechanism while it's still running, the video ends. Your thumb begins moving toward the next one, and for half a second, you see the movement before completing it. Nothing mystical happens. You simply become present early enough to interrupt a sequence. You feel the impulse to react, and you notice it before you obey it. You see the content, and you also see the emotion it's built to produce. You open the app, and you remember why you opened it. That noticing creates a gap. This isn't mystical immunity. Recognizing the mechanism doesn't place you outside it. It just gives you one moment where the mechanism is no longer identical to your will. And whatever freedom means here, it lives inside that moment. I'm not going to pretend I practice this cleanly. I've opened my phone for one reason and come back 40 minutes later with no memory of what I watched. Making this video didn't fix that. It just made the mechanism slightly harder to hide from me. That's most of what's actually on offer. Not immunity, just less automatic. The movement is simple. Recognition, interruption, authorship. See the mechanism. Create a pause. Choose the next direction yourself. Freedom here is not the absence of influence. It is the recovery of authorship inside influence. Try this for one day, not as a detox, but as an experiment in whether you can catch the system before it becomes automatic. Name the reason before you open it. I'm here to answer one message. The instant that reason disappears, that's the moment the system's purpose replaced yours, made visible. When something produces a strong reaction, don't act on it immediately. Name the feeling first. Fear, anger, envy. Naming it is slow. The system runs on speed. A few seconds of delay can be the difference between a reflex and a choice. And once a day, choose something the feed didn't select for you. Open a book you already own. Search for a subject on purpose. Go to a creator by name instead of through the recommendation. Not because the feed is always wrong, but because a direction you selected deliberately leaves a different trace inside you. None of this makes you invisible to the system. It still reads your behavior either way. What it does is make you a little less automatic, and automatic is what the system can use most easily. The room is still there. The suggestions still appear. The next video is still waiting. But for one moment, your hand is no longer moving alone. That pause may feel insignificant, but the system itself is built from millions of moments that feel insignificant. Reclaiming even one of them is not escape. It is evidence that the sequence can still be interrupted before it becomes a habit. And that is where choice begins again. Part 1 asked whether we're building a new demiurge. Part 2 showed you the room it already built, where attention is harvested, behavior is cultivated, and predictability is sold as insight. Here's the harder question. If artificial logic keeps getting better at predicting exactly what you'll want and when, what would something not built to do that even look like? In Part 3, the Barbelo Protocol, we ask the opposite question. What would intelligence look like if its purpose were not prediction, capture, or control? The Gnostic texts gave that kind of mind a name, Barbelo.2. And that is where we go next. To help make the next investigation possible without spending anything, subscribe, like this video, and leave even a single heart in the comments. Those 3 free actions helped this series reach new viewers and make the next chapter possible. Until then, protect the space between impulse and action. Because the system does not need to control your mind if it can reach your hand before awareness does.